Welcome to Pauline Interviews. And today we're going to talk about astrology. Now for me, astrology seems so complicated, so vast and so big, and for any of you who've never studied it, maybe you've just read your horoscopes in the paper, it might seem a bit complicated. So we're going to bring it down to Astrology 101. And I'm talking with astrologer today, Mark Dodish. And Mark, we've done interviews before, it's been a long time.
Yeah.
Usually I like to start my interviews by not only introducing my guests, but my guests telling me a little bit about their credentials, how they got into this field and this topic, so we know who's talking to us.
Sure. Well, you know, the joke when you go to the astrology conferences is that nobody picks astrology to be an astrologer. Astrology seems to pick you. And it's been the one thing in my life that I started learning in college, you know, books, friends, classes, what have you, and through life, and I mean, we're talking a long time ago, it's the one thing that's just stuck with me. And so that's where I go with the philosophy that the astrology picks you to be the astrologer, you don't pick it.
I've never heard that before,
yeah.
Very interesting.
But I've been doing it professionally since 1980, and of course I grew up in what we'll call the go to college, get out and do a real job and pay off your college loans kind of philosophy, which I did, you know, good boy. And in the mid-1990s, I had reached a point that I just couldn't do the corporate world anymore, and left to do this in full time, and it just has grown. And as I say, astrology picks you, and it's one of those things that you can just keep learning and learning and learning your whole life, and you're still just going to scratch the surface.
I know, it seems so complicated to me, and I remember last time we did the interview, I think you were talking about transits and lines, going, I don't get it, so I wanted to start really simple this time. So astrology, is it older than what's the difference first off between astrology and astronomy? They're somewhat related.
Well, in the old days, they were the same.
They were?
To be an astronomer, you had to be an astrologer. We know that astrology is at least 4,500 years old from old text and old scrolls, and you can even go find old cave paintings that has the astrological symbols on it that are 10,000 years old. So who knows how old it is? But somewhere around the time of Galileo and we'll call it the church and organized religion and science, it all started to split apart. And as a rule, you'll find that astronomers will be more anti-astrology, and astrologers are pretty much accepting of astronomy because it's a part of it.
Why do they think it's not? I thought astrology was scientific. The astronomers don't feel that it's a scientific?
Definitely not, as a rule. There's very few astronomers who would admit to, you know, liking astrology.
What's the mystical part about astronomy? Astrology.
Astrology.
See, they're so close together, I get it mixed up.
Yeah. The astrology, as you say, is a gigantic topic. You know, everybody does the astrology of your love life and your career and your health, and we call that exoteric astrology, meaning of this earth, like an exoskeleton is of the body. But then there's all these different branches, one of which is called esoteric astrology, which deals more with the mystical or the spiritual, or why am I on planet Earth and what is my service here? And esoteric astrology would be the generic name of that. And even within there's the 7 rays, which are frequencies of vibration that come from the universe that we're incarnate on. And as you say, it's probably more complicated than you want to get into, but
it's exciting though.
Well, and for people who, in my opinion, you know, the planet's in change right now, and people are seeking answers. And astrology is a wonderful tool, whether you're wondering about your next career or whether you're worried about what is my soul service and why am I on planet Earth. And so it gives people this range that says, oh, if I want to go deal with finances, I can deal with finances using astrology. If I want to look at my health, I can go there. So it's this broad-based tool that people can find what they need.
Let's get an example. How would that work? Let's say I want to do well in finances. How would astrology help me?
Well, first we go in, we cast a chart. We get your birth date, place, and birth time, and then we cast a chart that looks kind of like a pie with 12 little pie slices out of it, and each of those, what we call houses, represents something. So we would look at the money houses, the career houses, the work houses, and we could look on a vocational level and say, oh, where are your talents? Are your talents in TV production, or are they in healing type professions or teacher professions? And some people have a temperament for certain aspects of life, and it's not always as simple as you think. You'll see the classic, they work in the mainstream world for their money, but they're secretly a musician.
That's what I was gonna ask you, because your talents don't necessarily make you money.
That's true, and the lucky ones, their
Yes.
talents do make them
Yes.
money, and for others, they have what we'll call the day job and the hobby type of thing, and that can be frustrating for some people, because you want to do what you love.
I wanted to ask you, you said you need your birthplace. Now, I'm not too sure, I don't have my birth time on my birth certificate. I have to ask, I was born in Wales, so
Yeah.
I have to ask my aunt, and she's trying to remember, because my mom passed on.
Yeah.
And so if I don't come right exactly at the time, would I still be able to get my chart done?
Sure. There's several ways to deal with that. One is certainly for people born in the United States, if you write away to your Department of Vital Statistics in the county you were born, and President Obama made it famous, it's called the long form, which gives you all the details that are behind your birth certificate. Now, sometimes you don't have that available either, and you do, as you say, your aunt tells you approximately the
Yeah.
time. And then we have a process called rectification, which is we can go through your life and go, oh, did you have a car accident in this year, or break a leg in this year, or did some significant person die, or did you move to the United States from England in this year? And you say, no, Mark, we moved in 2 years earlier. Well, then I would adjust the chart a little bit.
It's like a mystery. It's like solving a mystery.
It
That's
very much
interesting.
is.
You mentioned the 12 houses.
Yeah.
Are those the 12 zodiac signs?
Yes and no. The zodiac signs fit in the houses, and they're based upon your time of birth. So, for example, if you're a Aries and you're born at sunrise, we would say that your ascendant, meaning the constellation that was rising on the eastern horizon, was Aries, and then we would cast the chart using all 12 signs around the circle. And then, so it's not always as neat as you'd like to have it be looked, which is one of the reasons some people shy away from astrology, because it can get complicated. But the beauty
But it's
of it,
accurate.
it's, oh gosh, I wouldn't do it if it weren't accurate. You can measure, you can see where you're right and where you're wrong. And now, I don't want to knock psychics, because I do intuitive readings as well, but with the psychics, for example, when I do an intuitive reading, I'll see fall leaves or spring buds coming out for my timing. But with astrology, if you've got accurate time of birth, you can go, oh, May is the day that the month that this is changing.
Where
Or-
psychic, it's more, sometimes it's symbolic, and you have to
Right.
interpret. But with astrology, you don't have to interpret. You've got the answers right there.
You can measure it, and you can see where you're right and where you were wrong.
Now, I'm a Pisces. My birthday is
Sure.
March 19th, but
Yeah.
Aries, I believe, is the 20th or 21st. So is there
Yes.
something about being a cusp birth?
Sure, if you're born on the cusp, you get a little bit of flavor of both. So the Pisces piece obviously actually rules the film and photography business, among other
And
things.
spirituality.
Spirituality, but there's always a high and a low is what you have to remember, because the low of Pisces is I want to escape, whether it's alcohol or Ben and Jerry's addictions.
Fortunately,
And-
that's
yeah,
not
yeah.
my
And
story.
the high is I am opening my intuition to my higher spirituality.
That's what I'm working towards, so.
And the Aries cusp, Aries is willing to pioneer a new path and try a new way and pick themselves up by the bootstraps when they get knocked down.
Well, that kind of, I don't mean to boast,
Yeah.
but that kind of describes, I relate
Sure.
to that. I
Sure.
relate to that.
And see, that's just one tiny piece. In a chart, we would look at your sun, your moon, and all the planets. Then we would place them in the signs that they were in when you were born, and then we put them into the different houses of the chart. So it's multi-dimensional.
So how, I understand that everything is energy,
Mhm.
and I understand the moon has a magnetic pull and the tides come and go, so I can
Yes.
physically understand that. But how do the planets actually influence our lives? That kind of,
Well, everything has a pull, everything has magnetics. I mean, the whole thing of why the orbits of the planets are the way they are is because of their whether it's gravitational pull or the relationship to the sun at the center of our solar system. So it's all related, and if you wanted to get into like quantum physics, you could say that a planet like Pluto, which was downgraded to being a dwarf planet by the astronomers a few years ago, you'd say, oh, it's a little planet way the heck out there, it has no effect on you. But when it hits your chart, you know, because Pluto is the burn your bridges, or I jokingly call it Dorothy and Toto can't go back to Kansas anymore, it changes your life. And the advantage is if you know that that's going on, what earlier you called transits, which overloaded you,
Yes.
is you could say, oh gee, Pluto is hitting my place of home and family. It's a classic buy or sell property or move. And in the past several years, buying and selling property has been a big issue because of the real estate market.
Yeah.
So wouldn't you want to know when a favorable cycle is to put your house on the market that you
Absolutely.
can sell it?
It sounds like astrology is a good way to actually manage your life once you get into it, and it's not voodoo, it's something really scientifically
Yeah.
based.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the planets. If you have this, what's the sun signify?
Well, the sun is your core life forces. Why do you get out of bed in the morning? It's the prana, the mana. It's the core life force that gets you motivated. Yeah.
So you like the sun in your space, or?
Sun is important. I mean, it gives us life.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of astrologers also give even sometimes more importance to the moon because the moon is so close. The moon represents your emotions, your nurturing, your sense of home and family, or what makes you feel good. So a lot of people say the moon is equally, or some people say more important than the sun, but that's a philosophical
Yes.
argument.
Now, I hope this isn't taking us out of astrology, but sometimes people say when there's a full moon, weird things happen, or people go crazy, not crazy,
Sure.
but they get a little wild. Is that because it's got such a strong pull on our,
Well,
on us?
there's actually studies that have been done that have found that, you're right, people act out more, or there'll be higher incidences in hospitals of people going off the edge. But the other thing you might not know is there's also studies that say there's a higher rate of suicides at the new moon. Because at the new moon, you know, everything is pulling within. And see, at the full moon, everything is acting out. So you have a bunch of weirdos
Yeah.
acting wild and crazy at the full moon, but at the new moon,
Wow.
they pull within, and we actually have
Oh.
statistics that there's higher rates of suicide.
So that's not a good moon.
Well,
I mean, that's a good moon, but I mean,
It depends what you're doing. If, let's say, for example, you're gonna have surgery, there is actual studies that say that there's a lower preponderance of bleeding issues. If it's like a surgery where bleeding is an issue, if you do it within a week of the new moon. Whereas at the full moon, there's higher rates of bleeding problems.
you know, I was gonna bring this up later, but Nancy Reagan, I believe, had an astrologer.
Quickly,
In the,
yes.
yeah, in the White House, but I think it was kept undercover. So people aren't quick to admit that they work with an astrologer. Has that been changing lately? Or does it still have like a negative connotation?
It is definitely better and more open. We knew that the Reagans were using astrology because they would have the Air Force One sit at the end of a runway and not take off till like 12:42 p.m. And we knew that the astrologer was choosing what we call election astrology. You elect to do something at an auspicious time. As an example, Al Gore announced his candidacy for the presidency at what we call it a void of course. It's the time when you should go take a nap or do your laundry. And, you know, and of course, all the astrologers said, oh boy, what the worst time you could pick to do that. So you want to choose a time where it's like having the wind at your back. We're getting help from the universe instead of trying to fight upstream.
So it sounds like astrology really is a great way to manage your life.
It is. I mean, you also need to, shall we say, not turn it into a dogmatic religion.
Yeah.
Because you still have to use your intuition and tune in. So I mean, I look at my astrology all the time, but you know, you can't always do something at the ideal or perfect time.
Yeah. It might suggest it, but it might not work out for you.
The classic is what we call Mercury retrograde. So when I'm working with somebody who doesn't believe astrology works for that, I'll point out a Mercury retrograde cycle. And Mercury's communication, scheduling, logic, it's your computer, it's your car. And sure enough, if there's going to be a scheduling snafu, or your car's going, or computer's gonna go crazy, that's a time when that classically happens.
Now, can we explain what Mercury retrograde means?
Sure, it's just the illusion, it's an optical illusion. If you were out in the dark night sky, at certain times of the year when, because we're not on the sun watching the planets, kind of Mercury moves around its orbit, and it looks like it's going faster. Like if you've ever been, for example, on a train, and for a moment another train passes you, you feel like you're going backwards. That's the retrograde feeling. And most of the planets do go retrograde, but Mercury is kind of the classic that you can point to and go, oh gee, you filmed the program and the sound didn't work.
Right, I told you that,
Yes.
on Monday.
Yeah, and that's a classic kind of a Mercury retrograde problem. But if you knew Mercury was going to be retrograde, you would leave extra time between your appointments so that you're not being crazy, or if you're trying to drive across town and you know it's rush hour, you don't wait to the last minute to get to leave the house.
But if it's an illusion, and I didn't realize Mercury is in retrograde, how did that affect me?
Well, it still affects you, you just might not be conscious of it. And see, the beauty of astrology is, let's pay attention, and we can use these energies to help us do life in a more ease and flow fashion rather than trying to fight it.
Well, it's right, it's like going with the flow.
Yeah.
Now, because of all the talk about pollution and maybe climate change,
Sure.
does any of that have any effect on astrology?
Well, normally what we do is we look at the further out a planet is, the more it affects a whole generation of people, whereas the close-in planets are more like your love life, let's say, where the far-out planets are, a perfect example is planet Uranus represents freedom and independence, and Pluto represents transformation. And they have been in a challenging relationship between June of 2012 and March of 2015. And if you look at the behavior in the US Congress in the past year, you can see that there's this battle between what we'll call the we need change right now and the slow but sure kind of a conservative change.
See, this is interesting, but I don't understand how the Pluto and Uranus relationship affects us on the planet.
And I don't know that there's a fancy answer for you, but we can say, I'll give you an example. There's actually scientific studies that have nothing to do with astrology that say when certain planets are in a 90-degree relationship to planet Earth, that we have a higher preponderance of earthquakes.
Well, I can see that maybe because of energy maybe being released.
And so if the energy is actually affecting the planet, we're having more earthquakes. You know, human beings are basically water.
We are water and energy.
And so that energy affects us.
I see that.
Is what happens.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so you might not see it, but as a Pisces, you could say, oh, I feel something. I might not know
because
what it is.
I'm a water symbol.
And see, the astrology can help you take that elusive, I can feel it, but I can't tell what it is, and give you better definitions so that you can work with it.
Now we mentioned some planets, Pluto. How did Mercury get to be communication? And isn't Mars like war and
Yes.
and Jupiter? You know, how do they get to be?
I can only say that it's been developing over thousands of years, because you can go back, as I say, to old cave paintings or to Egyptian philosophy, and you will see God of Wars, Ares. You know.
Yeah, that's true. And then Mars.
You know, or Venus. You know, Venus de Milo. You know, so all I can say is these archetypes have been developing for thousands of years.
I wanted to look at my notes because I knew I had a few questions that I forgot about. One was, so can I change, like I come into the earth and at a certain time, and there's also speculation whether or not before incarnated, if I pick the time, how could you, is that just kind of questionable?
Well, our philosophy would be is you choose the right time and moment for what you've come to learn, what you've come to teach in this life. And every chart has a set of challenges, it has a set of talents to work with those challenges. It's the philosophy that you're given what you need to work with what you need to work with. And from there, you would look and say, well, we all have a choice. Let's use your Aries or Mars warrior.
Yeah.
The low vibration is I'm going to speed and punch walls and tell the cop to go shine his badge when they stop you for speeding. The higher vibration is I'm going to take right action to change my life and, live a new way.
That's understandable.
And each of us has to choose, are we going to operate on the low Mars and with the anger?
Mhm.
And the high would be, I'm taking action to create a better world.
Now, we talked about when somebody first came to you, you would do a natal chart. You just need the location of their birth and the time of their birth and the date, of course.
Of course.
But is everything done on the British, I read somewhere the British time, so you have to make it a standard time? Like, if I was born in the United States, you put it to the British?
Right, Greenwich Mean
That's
Time.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how our time zones are measured. And so, for example, we're sitting here today in the Pacific time zone, which is 8 hours from Greenwich. Of course, in the old days, we'd have to get out all our books and make the calculations. Now you just click the computer and it does all the work for us.
And does that depend whether it's daylight savings time or not? Because
Oh,
we're
yeah.
9 hours ahead sometime. And then there's zones in the United States, they don't change they don't go back and forth the hour. But I guess an hour or so doesn't make a difference, does it?
Right, but these days the computers have that all figured out, so it's more brainless.
Yes.
Where you run into trouble is, for example, I was working with a person in Delhi, India today, and I do readings all over the world, and their time zone is 5 hours and 45 minutes from Greenwich time, and then the west coast of the US is 8 hours, so now you've got 13 hours and 45 minutes difference calculation. Which in the old days, you have to do that all by hand. And today...
What a headache.
Yeah.
You earned your money in the old days.
Absolutely. And today, the sophisticated software just makes it a no-brainer.
So I think I touched about on the general stuff on astrology, unless there's anything that you can think of. I was going to ask you two things. Number one is, let's talk about horoscopes. Now, you see in the paper sometimes a horoscope.
Sure.
And those are very, very general. I
Yeah.
mean, what can you derive from a horoscope in the paper? Just fun?
Well, number one, what I tell people is if you know your rising sign, which is associated with the time of birth, you would want to read both your sun sign and your rising sign, and you would get a better picture of what those horoscopes have to say. Now, I read those horoscopes myself, and the reason I read them is because I like to see what were they looking at that day, because obviously I have all my calendars and all my software, and so I try to see what were they looking at to write that for these people. And what I'll tell you is some of them are better than others.
Yeah, I was going to say, some of them are positive and make you feel good. Others are negative. They find the worst. Some find the worst.
And some of them, you just even wonder if they even had an astrologer write it or not.
Like they just made it up.
Yeah,
But-
truly.
Yeah.
And then others, you can tell, oh, they saw that this aspect was going on today, and
And some of them will say, if you were born on this day, I imagine that's maybe a little more accurate.
sure,
Yeah.
it gets, you can get as specific as you want. The issue with the newspaper or magazine is they only give you a certain amount of space.
Yeah, right.
I write an article for New Connections Journal here in the Northwest, and they give you 800 words to talk about 2 months. Well,
That's not enough.
it's not a lot of space, and so you do the best you can. And with the daily columns, you have 2 sentences. That's a tough column to write when you're trying to...
But you have your newsletter, Astromark. I love it.
Yeah,
Astromark.
I do a quarterly newsletter, Astromark, which is on the website, which is astromark.us. And that goes through, I like to do famous people with what's going on. I like to go doing a report for the full quarter as to what's up in a big picture level. Then I also have an email newsletter, which you can register for at astromark.us. And that's done at the new and full moon, so that's kind of the short and quick, here's what's up for the next 2 weeks.
And that's a free service. That's
Yeah,
really nice.
absolutely, yeah.
I wanted to ask you, because people are interested in famous people, can you tell us anything, pull one famous person out of the air and tell us a little bit about what you see for them? Or you don't have to, or we could just do what's coming up in general for the United States.
Sure. One of the favorites I've been looking at lately is Michelle Obama.
Oh, I like her, yeah.
Now, she is a Capricorn sun, which is, rules, regulations. She was even an attorney, which you'll see a lot of attorneys will have these structured kinds of charts. But her moon, which is her emotions, was in Pisces, and so think of that because you're a Pisces.
Yes.
So here's a case where we have this structured, rule, government, business, life force sun, and yet the other part of her is this intuitive, flowing, Pisces rules compassion. So here she is working with the children and education, and what is going on is the planet Neptune, and now this is getting a little further out, but
That's okay.
where Neptune is in the sky is in the sign Pisces. And Neptune travels through every sign about every 14 years. So it obviously affects a lot of people, okay? So here's Neptune in Pisces, spirituality, intuition, compassion, holding higher vision for people who can't see the higher vision. And here she is, you see her on TV all the time, out playing with the kids or something to help them with exercise or other things. And so she's an archetype on an emotional level of, oh, I am helping to hold this vision of how we want our children to progress. And the Capricorn part is the government rules and regulations, so she's putting the two together. Oh, I have my Capricorn structure, government, to bring my higher vision into the world, into form.
So she's actually operating in a higher vibration too, which
Yeah.
is good, being
Yeah.
where she is.
But see, we all need to have that choice, because
Yes.
a Pisces could also go be an alcoholic too.
Yes, right, because they're very emotional, I think.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes the world, I feel it sometimes because I'm very sensitive. And when I read news and, I stop watching news, but then you turn on your computer and you read all these terrible
Yeah.
things. And sometimes I have to get away from it because it just
Well,
emotionally gets to me. And that's why I turn to metaphysics, which really,
Sure.
really helps me.
And Pisces really need to develop healthy boundaries, because otherwise they're this psychic sponge. They go into a party with a bunch of dysfunctional people and they come out sick.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, this is kind of fun with astrology too, finding a person that your mate, you know,
Sure.
following your life partner.
Sure.
And I'm married to a Capricorn.
Sure.
And I feel a good balance because he's got
Sure.
that part you talked about, Michelle, and I've got
Yeah.
the sensitive part, so we kind of complement each other. So
Sure.
can two people get together to be the bad sign? I mean, not bad, but have a little more challenge?
Absolutely, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. It is a question a lot of people ask, and the answer is you can't just look at your sun sign and my sun sign. You have to look at the moon, which represents our emotions. You have to look at the ascendant, which is how you project yourself into the world. You look at the planet Mercury, because Mercury rules communications. Well, in a relationship, you need to be able to communicate.
That's, to me, this
know.
is personal, it's the most important.
Yeah, and so when people ask that question, oh, what sign am I compatible with? We tend to give the quick and simple answer because it's a big question. And the quick and simple answer is the air signs and the fire signs seem to work together. So air is, Libra, Gemini, and Aquarius. Fire is Leo, Aries, and Sagittarius. And then the water and the earth signs tend to work together. But obviously, it's not as simple as that.
That's true.
But that's the quick answer, because you get that question a lot.
So I find that this is very interesting, it's informative, it's helpful, and you would start people with a natal chart, but there are a lot of other charts that you do. We're going to talk about something called, in part 2, we're going to talk about astrocartography.
Yes, a very big subject.
So we're going to talk about that. So I want to thank you for watching Pauline Interviews, and I want to tell you, I'm here today at New Renaissance Bookstore. If you want to find wonderful metaphysical information, they've got everything here, and it's a lovely place, and it's on Northwest 23rd in Portland. So check it out sometime, and thanks for watching.